commercial culture in East St. Louis is probably not worth celebrating, as much as the artistic and political culture, and especially the African American legacy there. And around World War II and in the years after that, the black population found acceptance. They found they'd always been pretty politically well organized, and they found representation finally in the city council and official bodies. Black people were getting elected, and what sprang up was a thriving cultural scene centered on music. And in the 50s and 60s, the scene was not uncommon to have shows by people like Chuck Berry and Ike Turner and St. Louis musicians. Chuck Berry's first live performance was at the Cosmo Club, now demolished in East St. Louis. It was in East St. Louis that Miles Davis really got into performing and met a lot of people who were pivotal in his early career. A lot of athletes have come out of there, most famously Jackie Joyner-Kersee and Florence Griffith Joyner both have roots there, and Jackie Joyner-Kersee's made a large gift to open a new athletic center a couple of years ago, and the dancer Katherine Dunham came out of East St. Louis, and a lot of people from St. Louis, if they go to East St. Louis to do cultural tourism, they end up at the Katherine Dunham Museum, and that's, to me, it could be a building block for renewed exploration of the history of the city. One thing that I think is happening all over the country that St. Louis and other cities with large amounts of vacant land are really well suited for is the local food movement and the push to change the way we eat by eating more locally produced foods and reduce the distances that foods travel, and making sure that there's actual healthy food available in the inner city. I mean, East St. Louis has a great relationship to St. Louis because it's so close in, and because it's surrounded by so much rural land. There's already a lot of farming going on the east side in the Illinois area. It seems like East St. Louis could play a role in creating a network of food production that's very closely tied to the urban center of the area, so that the city of St. Louis could sustain itself and sustain its population through locally produced food that comes from, right across the river. It's not that far. There's a friend of mine who's a graduate student at Washington University, Andrew Faulkner, who's working on a master's thesis that envisions reopening and reusing the stockyards, pens, and even some of the abandoned packing houses around there as kind of this central place in a new network of locally produced food, locally produced beef. And we have the opportunity to do what we didn't do when we were rushing to urbanize these areas, and that is to integrate food production with areas where there's dense settlement, which could create a very, very sustainable region. There's been talk of a plan, this developer from Salt Lake City, Lynn Leisure, who's interested in doing some kind of development there that I think he wants to call it Main Street USA, or some kind of homage to long-lost American Main Street culture. But that really seems hollow. It seems like it has very little to do with the actual cultural history and use of a street like Collinsville Avenue. You're almost saying that this isn't a place. This has no history. This is a blank slate for us to impose some of our own contemporary vision on, and that's not true. I mean, it's a place that has evolved and reached a certain point, and it's a point that's no one would say is a good point. No one would say it's a point a place should reach, but it's there. And I think to make sense of it, we have to really treat it as its own place, its own culture, and look at it, and realistically deal with what happened and why East St. Louis never had the cultural and political power to stem its decay and to stem its decline.